This is the final and last chapter of The Immortal Life of Henrietta Lacks by Rebecca Skloot, Chapter 38, The Long Road to Clover. On January 18th of 2009, on a cold sunny Sunday, I pulled off the highway onto the road into Clover. As I passed one green field after the next, I thought, I don't remember the road into Clover being so long. Then I realized I just passed the Clover post office. It was across the street from a big empty field. But it used to be across the street from the rest of downtown. I didn't understand. If that was the post office, where was everything else? I kept driving for a moment, thinking, did they move the post office? Then it hit me. Clover was gone. I jumped out of the car and ran into the field to the spot where the old movie theater once stood, where Henrietta and Cliff once watched Buck Jones films. It was gone. So was Gregory Martin's grocery and Abbott's clothing store. I stood with my hand over my mouth, staring in disbelief at an empty field until I realized there were splinters of brick and small white plaster tiles pressed into the dirt and glass. I knelt down and began collecting them, filling my pockets with what remained of the town of Henrietta's youth. I have to send some of this to Deborah, I thought. She's not going to believe Clover is gone. Standing on Main Street staring at a corpse of Clover downtown, I felt like everything related to Henrietta's story was vanishing. In 2002, just 1 year after Gary had wrapped his hands around Deborah's head and passed the burden of the cells on to me, he had died suddenly at the age of 52 from a heart attack. He had been walking towards Scooty car, carrying his best suit to put in the trunk so it wouldn't get wrinkled on the way to Cootie's mother's funeral. A few months later, Deborah called to say that Cliff's brother Fred had died from throat cancer. Next it was Day, who died of a stroke, surrounded by his family. Then Cootie, who had killed himself with a shotgun to the head. Each time someone died, Deborah called crying. I thought the calls would never end. Death just following us in this story everywhere we go, she'd say. But I'm hanging there. In the years that followed the baptism, not much changed for the Laxes. Babette and Lawrence went on with their lives. Lawrence didn't think about the cells much anymore, though occasionally he and Zachariah still entertained the idea of suing Hopkins. Sonny had a quintuple bypass in 2003 when he was 56 years old. The last thing he remembered before falling unconscious under the anesthesia was a doctor standing over him saying his mother's cells were one of the most important things that had ever happened to medicine. Sonny woke up more than $125,000 in debt because he didn't have health insurance to cover the surgery. Zachariah got kicked out of his assisted living facility, then a Section 8 housing project, where he smashed a 40-ounce beer bottle over a woman's back and pushed her through a plate glass window. He sometimes worked with Sonny, driving a truck. In 2004, Deborah left her husband and moved into an assisted apartment of her own, which she had longed to do for years. She was tired of fighting with Pullum, plus their row house had too many stairs. After she moved out to cover her bills, she went to work full-time for her daughter Tonya, who had opened an assisted living home in her house. Each morning, Deborah left the assisted living facility where she lived, and spent the day cooking and cleaning for the 5 or 6 men living in her daughter's home. She quit after 2 years because her body couldn't take walking up and down stairs all day. When Deborah finally divorced Pullum in 2006, she had to itemize her income as part of a request for the judge to waive her filling fee. She listed $732 per month from Social Security disability and $10 per month in food stamps. Her checking account was empty. When I went back to visit Clover and found Main Street razed, it had been a few months since Deborah and I talked. During our last call, I told her that the book was done, and she said she wanted me to come to Baltimore and read it to her, so I could talk her through the hard parts. I'd called several times since to plan the visit, but she hadn't returned my calls. I left messages, but didn't push her. She needs some space to prepare herself, I thought, She will call when she's ready." Then I got home from Clover. I called again saying, "I brought something back for you from Clover. You won't believe what's happened down there." But she didn't call back. On May 21st of 2009, after leaving many messages, I called again. Her voicemail box was full. So I dialed Sonny's number to say something I'd said to him many times over the years. "Will you tell your sister to stop messing around and return my calls? I really need to talk to her. Our time is running out." When he answered the phone, I said, "Hey, Sonny, it's Rebecca." And for a moment the line went silent. "I've been trying to find your number," he said, and my eyes filled with tears. I knew there was only one reason Sonny would need to call me. Deborah had gone over to her niece's house on Mother's Day, a week and a half before my call. Sonny had made crab cakes for her, the grandchildren were there, and everyone laughed and told stories. After dinner, he took Deborah back to the apartment she loved and said good night. She stayed home the next day after the leftover crab cakes Sonny sent home with her and talked to David on the phone. He was learning to drive and he wanted to come over in the morning to practice. The next morning when he called, she didn't answer. A few hours later, Sonny dropped by to check on her, as he did nearly every day, and found her in her bed, arms crossed on her chest, smiling. He thought she was sleeping, so he touched her arm, saying, "Dale, time to get up." But she wasn't sleeping. "She's in a better place now," Sonny told me. "A heart attack just after Mother's Day. She wouldn't have wanted it any other way. She suffered a lot in life, and now she's happy." After finding Deborah in her bed, Sonny cut a lock of her hair and tucked it inside their mother's Bible with the locks of hairs from Henrietta and Elsie. "She's with them now," he told me. "You know, there's no place in the world she'd rather be." Deborah was happy when she died. Her grandson, little Alfred, was now 12, headed into 8th grade, and doing well in school. Lawrence and Babette's granddaughter, Erica, had gotten into Penn State after writing an admissions essay about her great-grandmother Henrietta's story had inspired her to study science. After transferring to the University of Maryland, she earned her bachelor's degree and entered master's programs in psychology, becoming the first of Henrietta's descendants to attend graduate school. At 17, Deborah's grandson David was about to graduate from high school. He had promised Deborah he would go to college and continue learning about Henrietta until he knew everything there was to know about her. "That really made me feel okay about dying whenever my time come," she told me. As Sonny told me the news of Deborah's death, I sat, staring at a framed picture of her that's been on my desk for nearly a decade. In it, her eyes are hard, her brows creased and angry. She's wearing a pink shirt and holding a bottle of pink Benadryl. Everything else is in red: her fingernails, the welts on her face, the dirt beneath her feet. I stared at that picture for days after her death as I listened to hours of tape of us talking and read the notes I'd taken the last time I saw her. At one point during that visit, Deborah, David, and I sat side by her side on her bed, backs to the wall, legs outstretched. We had just finished watching two of Deborah's favorite movies back to back, Roots and the animated movie Spirit, about a wild horse who was captured by the U.S. Army. She wanted us to watch them together so we could see the similarities between the two. Spirit fought his freedom, just as Kunta Kinte did in Roots, she said. People was always trying to keep them down and stop them from doing what they want, just like people always doing with me and the story about my mother, she said. When the films ended, Deborah jumped out of bed and put in yet another video. She pressed play, and a younger version of herself appeared on the screen. It was one of nearly a dozen tapes the BBC had recorded that didn't make it into the documentary. On the screen, Deborah sat on a couch with her mother's Bible open in her lap. her hair brown instead of grey, her eyes bright, with no circles beneath them. As she talked, her hand stroked the long lock of her mother's hair. "I often visit her hair in the Bible," Deborah said into the camera. "When I think about this hair, I'm not as lonely. I imagine what would it be like to have a mother to go to laugh, to cry, hug. God willing, I can be with her someday. I'm looking forward to that." The younger Deborah said she was glad that when she died, she wouldn't have to tell her mother the story of everything that had happened with herself and the family, because Henrietta already knew. "She's been watching us and seeing all that's going on down here. Deborah said, "she's waiting patiently for us. There won't be any words, just a lot of hugging and crying. I really believe she's up in heaven and she's doing okay, because she did enough suffering from everyone down here. On the other side, they say there's no pain or suffering. I want to be there with my mother." Sitting between me and David on the bed, Deborah nodded at her younger self on the screen and said, "Heaven looks just like Clover, Virginia. My mother and I always loved it down there more than anywhere else in the world." She stroked David's hair. "I don't know how I'm going to go," she said. "I just hope it's nice and calm. But I tell you one thing, I don't want to be immortal if it means live forever, 'cause then everybody else just die and get old in front of you while you stay the same, and that's just sad." Then she smiled. "Maybe I'll come back as some healer cells like my mother. That way we can do good together out there in the world." She paused and nodded again. "I think I'd like that." This is the end of chapter 38 and also the conclusion of this book. Later on, you can watch and read the other parts, the afterword and things like that. But this is it for now, guys. And I'll make a last video about my thoughts regarding this book. Okay?